Oh, there we go. I could holler, you probably could have still heard me. But in any case, there are two mics on either side of the room. But before we take questions from the audience, I want to just pose one question to you all, have you all answer it. Dorothy talked about this 535 report, which I think is a really great idea. What other kind of information would you suggest could be used to galvanize people around this tax fairness issue? I mean, I don't think that, let's say my mom, who knows that the tax code is unfair and fusses about all the time, sees it as something that she can make a difference in. And she writes her Congress, she's retired, she's 86, she writes one member of Congress just about every day about something. But this may not be one, it's a shame, when I get to be a little old lady, I'll probably do the same thing. But this is probably one that she wouldn't get her hands around. So what kind of info would you use to help other folks, a report like Dorothy's 535 report? Frank?
We've done a lot of polling in this area, and I think what is important to understand is the public is way ahead of politicians on this issue. They are down the line, and I'm not talking just about Democrats and not even just about independent voters, even over into the Republican side of the ledger. They are feel very strongly about tax fairness, very strongly about the rich needing to pay more in taxes and about corporations needing to pay more. And it's so much so that it's almost a value that the public holds, and I think it stems from how the public feels about fairness. And so I don't think the issue is as much that we need stuff to educate them about this. The lens they're looking at this, and I think the reason they feel so strongly about this is because they see the tax system as representing how things are so messed up in Washington, that it is the epitome of how the system is rigged in favor of people who have power. And so really what we need mostly is a set of leaders who are willing to make this, just like one side of this debate owns this is about political power, fundamentally. This is about political power. And one side says, no more, we're not going to raise taxes on anybody. And really what they're doing is largely protecting a certain class. But the other side is kind of weak-kneed about it. They're not really that strong about it. They're not out there leading, they're not owning this issue. And until this other side, us, owns this issue in a deep way and mobilizes the public around it, we're not going to win. So it's less about educational materials and it's more about political mobilization.
Yeah, you know, one thing that I think is universal is that all families have goals that they want to achieve. They have the aspirations, they have things that they want to do. They want a home, they want to save for retirement, they want to send their kids to college. These are all things that the tax code purports to help people do. So I think the key thing is, again, I agree with Frank that they don't need education. They understand that it's messed up, but they're kind of lost in the, well, what? So kind of creating some solutions that people could wrap their heads around how a re-envisioned tax code can actually help them accomplish the things that they want to accomplish for themselves and their families, I think is the way that you galvanize people. Because if you just leave them with anger, then they're just angry. And then they don't know what to move to. So I think it's upon us to try to help them envision some of the solutions that could happen if they were to get involved and get engaged.
Ida or Dorothy?
I think framing the debate is important. So when we talk about paying taxes in exchange for benefits, people immediately go to TANF, when we really need to go to who benefits from a civil justice system? People with property, people with lots and lots of property. So we need to reframe this to show all of the benefits the richest Americans get that they're not paying for. We're paying for it. We don't have a lot of property. We don't need a court system. People who have billions of dollars, they need a court system.
Yeah, I think to the degree that we can, and I think it's tricky, right? I don't know that we found the right frames yet for everybody having the same sense that many more people benefit from the tax code, from taxes and paying taxes than, it's just a very difficult place, right? So I think we were talking about this earlier today. There's just a lot of compartmentalizing in our brains about which things are things that we don't want to spend money on and which things we do. I think that part of that is especially important to have a conversation about at a conversation at the Color of Wealth conference, is part of the compartmentalization about racism, as part of the conversation about, I don't want those kinds of programs because I associate those kinds of programs with people that I don't know and aren't part of my family, or do we associate other things with something we all universally love, like Social Security? I think that we have different compartments, even though it's one tax code, and that we don't actually hit all of those same factors the same way right now.
We're going to go from either side, and if you just identify yourself and either direct your question to one or all the panelists. I don't know how much time we have, but they'll let us know. But let's start with you.
Sure. This is Emory Co. Senator Sherrod Brown's office. This is sort of going off of what Ida, you talked about previously about retirement security. There's been a wealth of data and research regarding disparities between races and retirement security in general, opting into financial services between how much you're investing to actual access and opting in to begin with. Do you all have any policy suggestions offhand that would incentivize these programs independent of the obvious putting the horse before the cart and changing the tax code so it actually is progressive and right?
We can hint at that, I think, as a panel here now, and I'd also say there's an entire event here next week on coverage and the new solutions and how those play into the tax reform conversation. So, I mean, certainly some things that are not tax code conversations are MyRA, right? So there is, this recognition that many employers, especially small employers, don't offer 401k plans. There's a lot of fiduciary responsibility in that. There's a lot of, frankly, for people who created a small business to do the small business, there's a lot of pieces about the accounting and the software and everything else that's there that they really don't feel like they can be a part of. A MyRA account and what's going on at the state level now with secure choice, with the idea that you would have to offer the opportunity to all to all employees to open an account, and that there could even be, in some of those ways that they're designing those, there could be an auto escalation opportunity. There can be a tax incentive in terms of to the employer to match the money, but that's at the discretion right now of this discussions at the state level. So, auto IRA and the match and figuring out ways for small employers and large employers who don't offer this to be able to get into that. I think that there's a lot on the table right now in terms of solutions that actually aren't directly related to the tax code. We're just thinking that in an ideal world, given that we're already spending $130 billion to incent savings in this country, and we're looking at, and yet we're only covering 47% of the population with that savings, that there's going to be something to unlock that's connected in both, so that those credits do incent more people to save, and so that we really have a chance of helping them build a more robust account for retirement.
On the side?
Good afternoon. I was surprised that the panel didn't speak about the payroll tax, which has got to be one of the most regressive taxes we have in the tax code because it's subject to an income cap. And this is a tax also that applies only to wages, not to other income. And the tax rate used to be about 6% in 1960 and has now doubled to 12.4%. I don't know of any other tax that has grown like this. And it's probably no coincidence that the most regressive tax has doubled since 1960. So would you like to speak about the payroll tax?
Anyone?
So, yeah, I completely agree. I think what's even more regressive about the payroll taxes is it's eliminated at a certain income level. Then with the Affordable Care Act, there's a kicker once your income gets to a certain level. But that just means low-income workers have Social Security taxes taken out on 100% of their wages, while higher income workers do not. So there's that problem. There's also Social Security is not withheld from income from stock, except the kicker that we get from the Affordable Care Act. So yeah, Social Security wages, extremely regressive. Agreed.
Unfortunately, this young lady here has shown me the zero sign. Now, I could pretend I didn't know what it meant, but that would allow y'all to think that I was sillier than most. So I can, one more question? Lovely. Okay, you're next.
Hello. I was wondering if you could speak to how the tax code inscribes social values, and particularly how it hurts predominantly like households of color who are raised in single-parent households and/or intergenerational households.
I mean, the things that we put up there, right, are basically the government making values about what it is that they want to incentivize. So when they say, what do they want a family to be, right? They want them to be a homeowner. They want them to send their kids to college. They want them to save for their retirement, to be austere and not spend. Like, these are the values that they're ascribing through the tax code. I'd say to some folks, right, that doesn't fit, right? To be a renter, and the tax code does very little for you as a renter. It does very, very little for you even as a homeowner, as we talked about, as a low-income homeowner. So I'd say there's a lot of that there, but, you know, those are still things people aspire to have. And while there are certain value judgments that are made, it's there. We could fight about, say it's unfair, or we could look at it and say, okay, how do we, if people want access, because I think there's a problem of access in a lot of rare cases, and I had talked about particularly in retirement, the access issue. If it's an issue of access, how do we get people more access so they can begin to reap the benefits that higher income people have? So,
Does anyone else want to comment? This will be your opportunity for like last comments before this lovely young lady shows me that zero again.
So I would say that's absolutely right, and getting back to my point about the 535 report, if you look at Congress and you look at the tax code, you look at the view of the lawmakers, that what the tax code does is privilege the lifestyles of members of Congress. So so in terms of the question, you're exactly right, and I don't think Congress designs tax laws with single-family parents in mind. I think they design tax laws for, you know, a man and a wife who are married with kids, and what does that look like? And you look at the code, that's what that looks like.
Anyone else?
Well, I guess, you know, the epitome of the problem is last week in the House, we had a vote on whether or not to repeal the estate tax. And the estate tax, 0.2% of the population, 1 out of every 500 people pays the estate tax. You have to have an estate that's worth at least $5.5 million before any taxes are paid on it. And that was put up as a major vote, and to me that was a fundamental statement about values for our government. And, you know, and it passed quite, you know, well.
I think as a final point, I'd go back to something that Jeremie said at the beginning and that we're all here for, which would be that, you know, one of the changes that we're talking about today could be billions of dollars for families. Helping to frame the debate on what that family is that gets helped with those changes, I think is in our power to change some of that debate. But one of these changes means billions of dollars, and that's what we're really talking about. The tax code is the place where $billion+ changes in terms of how our current spending levels empower families. And I think that it's huge when you look at it all together. Some pieces of this are more ripe for discussion and change than others, and banding together to have those conversations is a really promising opportunity.
I think we are winding. This lady has been sitting here very patiently. Can we just get her last question in?
Well, it's not that, but I've been given dispensation because the next speaker is not quite ready.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was just thinking that we've talked a lot about individual taxes and the unbalance between taxing work and wealth, but we haven't talked much about that other person, the corporation. And I was in Florida, and a community organization in an asset building conference was giving an award to the local Burger King because they had spent time telling their employees about the EITC. So I'm thinking, like, what a win. Here's a corporation that pays their workers nothing, And then they're getting credit for the fact that taxpayers are actually subsidizing what they should be paying. So while I know that the EITC has been great in terms of lifting people out of poverty, it's actually a subsidy to employers. And I'm just thinking that as we fight for change tax policies, how we talk about that and how we talk about the corporate responsibility, which has also shifted. We get a lot more of our taxes now from individuals than from corporations than we used to. So just wondering in terms of our framing these conversations, if you had any thoughts.
I know this issue quite well. We've put out 2 reports on Walmart, one last year that's determined that we're spending about $6 billion a year subsidizing Walmart's low pay through child tax credit, Medicaid, EITC, housing, a few other programs. And then we just...
Food stamps.
Sorry?
Food stamps.
Food stamps, that's right. And we just put a report out a couple of weeks ago to look at their increase in pay to $9 an hour and $10 an hour. And what we found is that in most cases, that will not make a difference. That basically folks will still, you have to get to $15 an hour actually, as a single parent. It's hard to tell for couples because, you know, Walmart doesn't put out that kind of personal information about their workers, but you have to get to $15 an hour for a single parent before those programs, you wouldn't be eligible for some of those programs, not all those programs. This is a very tricky area, and I've gotten a bunch of blowback within my own organization about how to talk about this and how to work on this, because, you know, the reality is that we are subsidizing the fast food industry and the big box companies to a substantial extent through the tax system. On the other hand, even if you got to $15 an hour, that's not, it may be a, quote, livable wage, but, you know, it really isn't for most families. And so you don't want to undermine the support for those programs, and there's some folks on the other side that are trying to tear those programs down all the time. So it's a little bit of a tricky area. I think that we need to be talking about it because the public needs to understand what the actual costs are for this low-wage, low-road economy, and that they're using the system. And I hadn't heard of Burger King actually getting an award for teaching them how to access those benefits.
I'd just be careful about making that connection because I think that it's still low wages does not absolve the government of responsibility to make investments in families. So I agree with Frank wholeheartedly on that point. So I'd be careful about making that connection because I don't, and if you see it's a wage well above the minimum to get to that point where we're even in the ballpark. And even then, I still don't think it clears the government of that responsibility of investing in families. So.
I think that I see Dr. Rockeyboard there, which probably means it's time for us to exit this stage. Is something like that? Something like that. Thank you, everyone.